Welcome to this explainer. So today we are diving into a deeply fascinating biological mystery. You know that feeling when you're in a super high-stakes situation and suddenly your logic just absolutely vanishes? We have all been there. We've all had those moments where our rational thinking is just completely overpowered by this massive surge of raw emotion. Well, today, we're going to unpack the actual, literal neurological mechanics behind why our feelings so frequently and so powerfully override our reason.
Think about this quote for a second. The ancient philosopher Aristotle actually framed this perfectly in his work, The Nicomachean Ethics. He wrote, "Anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy." Man, he hit the nail on the head. Right? Humanity has been grappling with this exact struggle for thousands of years. It really pulls you right into just how deeply relatable the struggle for emotional control actually is.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really understand this age-old problem, we're going to be leaning on the landmark insights from Daniel Goleman's incredible book, Emotional Intelligence. We're going to map out exactly what is happening inside our brains when we lose our cool, and more importantly, why it happens in the first place.
So what actually happens when our passions completely overwhelm our reason? To set this up, the source text gives us two incredibly visceral real-life examples that show us exactly what this looks like in practice.
First, take Gary and Mary Jane Chauncey. They were trapped in a sinking Amtrak train. In that terrifying moment, they completely bypassed all human self-preservation to frantically push their wheelchair-bound daughter through a window to rescuers. They ultimately sacrificed their own lives. Now, from a purely logical, calculating standpoint, that's completely irrational. But from the heart, it's this heroic, deeply evolutionary love. Now, contrast that with Bobby Crabtree. He heard a noise in his house, grabbed a pistol, and driven by an instant, terrifying impulse of fear, he shot his own daughter, who had just jumped out of a closet playing a practical joke on him. It's a devastating, heartbreaking tragedy. But here's the thing. It was driven by the exact same biological mechanism, our root impulses entirely overriding our intellect.
These intense reactions, whether they are unbelievably heroic or incredibly tragic, they reveal a really profound biological reality about us. We actually operate with two semi-independent minds.
On one side, there's your rational mind. That's the one that is thoughtful, aware, ponderous, and highly capable of reflection. But sitting right alongside it is your emotional mind. And this one is impulsive, incredibly powerful, sometimes entirely illogical, yet it operates with this deep, immediate certainty. Now, on a normal day, these two minds work in pretty tight harmony. But in a true crisis, the whole ratio shifts. The more intense the feeling, the more dominant that emotional mind becomes, aggressively capturing the upper hand and pretty much leaving the rational mind completely helpless.
And you have to understand, these emotions, they are not just abstract, floaty feelings in our heads. Oh no. They are instant, hardwired physical plans for handling life.
Evolution actually programmed very specific biological signatures for every single emotion we have. Think about it. When you feel anger, blood literally flows to your hands, making it physically easier to grasp a weapon or strike a foe. When you feel fear, blood shunts to your large skeletal muscles, like your legs, getting you totally ready to flee, which, by the way, is exactly why your face might go pale when you're scared. The blood is leaving it. Even surprise has a physical job. It lifts your eyebrows to allow more light to strike your retina, taking in more visual information. These are absolutely perfect, automated physical manifestations designed to prep our ancient ancestors for survival out in the wild.
But here is where we run into a massive problem, our evolutionary blueprint. We are dealing with a dangerous mismatch right now. We are walking around confronting postmodern, complex dilemmas using an emotional repertoire that was custom-tailored to the life-or-death urgencies of the Pleistocene era. The slow, plodding march of evolution simply hasn't kept up with the incredibly rapid rise of human civilization.
Let's look at how this happened. Biologically, the human brain evolved from the bottom up. It started with the brainstem, which just handles basic life functions, like making sure you're breathing. From that ancient root emerged the limbic system, and that's what brought emotion and memory to the table. It wasn't until millions of years later that the neocortex, the thinking, rational brain, evolved out of that emotional center. And this proves something absolutely vital. There was an emotional brain long before there was a rational one.
And because of that bottom-up architecture, our emotions have immense power to influence and even completely hijack the rest of the brain. Let's look at a pretty chilling example from 1963 known as the Career Girl murders. Richard Robles was a seasoned burglar. He broke into what he totally thought was an empty apartment, but when he was suddenly confronted by two young women who lived there, he panicked. He exploded in this uncontrollable frenzy of pure rage and fear, and brutally murdered them both. Decades later, sitting in prison, he lamented, "I just went bananas. My head just exploded." He was entirely unaware of what had actually come over him until it was far, far too late. Now, obviously, this is a very extreme example. But listen, the underlying mechanism here is the exact same one that makes us snap at our spouse or completely lose our temper in traffic without even thinking.
Psychologists have a great term for this. It's called an emotional hijacking. Essentially, it's an instant neural takeover. Your emotional brain proclaims an absolute crisis and recruits the rest of your brain and your entire body to its urgent agenda. Crucial milliseconds before the thinking brain has had a chance to even fully glimpse what is happening, let alone decide if it's actually a good idea.
So what is the biological culprit hiding deep inside our limbic system that actually triggers these massive emotional explosions? What's the watchman that's sounding this alarm?
Meet your amygdala. It's this little almond-shaped cluster right in the limbic brain, and it acts as the seat of all human passion. To give you an idea of how important this is, if a person's amygdala is severed, they suffer from something called affective blindness. They lose all interest in other people, they don't even recognize close friends or family, and they have literally no feelings about feelings. Life without the amygdala is a life completely stripped of personal meaning.
Goleman uses this brilliant metaphor. He likens the amygdala to a frantic alarm company operator, just constantly, obsessively scanning every single piece of incoming sensory data. It challenges every situation with one incredibly primitive question. Is this something I hate, that hurts me, something I fear? And if the answer is yes, boom, the amygdala trips the neural wire and telegraphs a massive message of crisis to the entire brain.
But here's the real mystery. How exactly does the amygdala manage to hijack us before our rational brain even knows what's going on? For a long time, science simply had no idea. But that brings us to Joseph Ledoux's groundbreaking discovery. He mapped the hidden circuitry of the emotional brain, and his findings literally overthrew conventional neuroscience.
So normally when you see something, the sensory signal goes from your eye to the thalamus and then up into the thinking brain, the neocortex. The thinking brain takes its time, sorts it out, decides what it means, and then passes the signal down to the amygdala to trigger a proportional emotional response. It's a calculated, sensible process that actually allows you to evaluate a situation before reacting.
But Ledoux discovered a neural back alley. Sometimes a smaller portion of the signal goes from the eye to the thalamus and then straight to the amygdala, completely bypassing the neocortex. This is a massive shortcut. It allows the amygdala to receive direct input from your senses and trigger a huge hormonal fight-or-flight reaction. We literally react before our thinking brain even registers what we are reacting to. It's wild.
Now, understanding all of this biology might make it sound like we are just prisoners to our hardwiring, right? But Goleman actually pivots the narrative here to a message of profound hope and agency. Our emotional life is absolutely a domain that can be handled with skill.
And this brings us right to the concept of emotional intelligence. It is essentially a master aptitude. We're talking about self-awareness, self-control, zeal, persistence, and empathy. This explains exactly why people with totally average IQs can thrive and do surprisingly well in life, while brilliant people, absolute geniuses, can entirely derail their lives if they lack these critical emotional skills.
And honestly, the most empowering takeaway from all of this research is simply this: temperament is not destiny. Sure, our genetic heritage hands us certain emotional set points, but the brain circuitry is extraordinarily malleable. We have the sheer power to reshape our emotional habits, to literally learn and train our brains to respond differently over time.
So knowing that your brain has this built-in alarm system, an emotional sentinel that can bypass your logic in literally milliseconds, the ultimate question becomes, how will you train your emotional sentinel? Going back to Aristotle, how will you build your emotional intelligence to ensure you react with the right emotion, at the right time, and in the right way? It is a master aptitude, and mastering it, well, it might just change your entire life. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.